can say that they can conclude trade talks in a matter of months. The European Union tends to take years over these things, and as things stand at the moment, if Boris Johnson's proposition went through, and I hope strongly it doesn't, that we leave the European Union and then we're in transition, but only till the end of 2020. So that threat of no deal doesn't get removed. Now, what I would say to the opposition parties, I think collectively that we've all got a responsibility to explain this to people and say why it's important that we eject this government from office.
Jenkins, very keen to get in. Well, I just want to ask a question. Can we take it then that if ever Scotland voted to leave the United Kingdom, the SNP would never agree to leave the United Kingdom until the British government had chosen to give Scotland a deal? So without a deal, Scotland would remain in the United Kingdom indefinitely. Is that right?
That's frankly ridiculous.
Well, it's the same, isn't it?
Because
if you left the United Kingdom,
no, you're being obtuse. Because what we will do is we will have a white paper, we'll have a plan, and we'll be prepared to go into negotiations.
So you'd leave
when
without
that
a deal,
happens, and of course we'll be staying in the European Union. No, that's not what we're talking about. Because
it's a pity that the attempts made by Beta Blackford and this little segment here to wrangle out of the conversation and change the subjects were allowed to go under the radar somewhat. But apart from that, it was still rather humorous to see his methodology turned on its head for once. But it was what he said there that has really convinced me that this man does not have the brain capacity to formulate a truthful argument at all at any point. As he mentions a white paper that currently doesn't exist, but oddly enough, then proceeds to reiterate a near word-for-word account from their 2014 white paper, when he goes on to talk about seeking out negotiations and talks and so on. Now, bearing in mind, of course, that the SNP for a time during the 2014 referendum run-up were insisting that an independent Scotland would actually inherit EU member status because the UK was currently in the EU. It then transpired that that was all the shit, to put it bluntly, which was then further reaffirmed in the aforementioned white paper, which stated that their intentions in the event of independence would be to try and enter negotiations or talks with both the EU and UK. And that same standard of practice would be identical today than it was back then. So why is it that he finishes off by saying that we'd be staying in Europe when he knows that's a fucking lie? But why should we expect anything less from a party that is run by a bunch of feminists, one of which telling her voter base to vote to remain if they wanted independence for Scotland in the future, but yet her mandate states that Scotland would have the right to hold a referendum on independence if the UK left the EU, with Scotland being dragged out against its will. And when you take into consideration all the things that they have tried up until this point to try and stop Brexit at every turn, kind of goes without saying that they don't have a mandate for independence. It's always been the plan B. At no point was it ever their plan A, despite what they try to have you believe. And the proof's in the pudding. It's showcased in the SNP's own falsehoods, stating that we'd be an independent country within the European Union. They've intertwined European Union membership with independence. The two have become synonymous all of a sudden. And the independence movement has become a pro-European party, and it's generally accepted within said pro-European party that independence is merely a mechanism to get us from A to B. So I stumbled across two separate articles, both of which were published at some point this morning, and both just so happen to include excerpts from interviews with none other than Beta Blackford, the man of the moment, the big bad beta who was going to take the fight to the Brexiteers in Scotland, the big bad beta who, just like the rest of the SNP, would not be where they are now if it weren't for the fact that they do nothing other than spin lies and deceive. Don't take my word for it. Let's compare what he says within both. So the first one we have here is the SNP Westminster leader doesn't accept early poll could return Tory majority. Yada yada yada. Round about the bottom half, he goes on to talk about it's up to the Labour Party and others in England and Wales to do their job in defeating the Conservatives. We will do that in Scotland. Right, you will. But the simple fact remains that we cannot sit back and allow this Prime Minister to take us out of Europe. In Scotland, we've got that alternative if the UK is determined to do that. We've got an insurance policy of being able to have a referendum on independence and making sure that we stay in Europe. A few things to point out with that before I compare it with the other article.
But if you're basing your decision on what it means for independence, let me be very, very clear. The only sensible and logical vote is one for Scotland to remain in Europe.
A mandate obtained by telling a bunch of the bulk of her supporters at that time, may I add, that if they were basing their decision in the referendum on what it meant for independence, then they needed to vote to remain. The premise for independence doesn't arise if you voted to leave, etc, etc. So naturally, it goes without saying that these people acted accordingly and voted the way that she directed them to. If anything, the 62% does more to indicate just how many people wanted independence at that time in comparison to how many people wanted to be part of the EU forevermore. And if it really has nothing to do with her influence on what she said to these people, and it's merely down to the fact that everybody in Scotland's an EU loyalist and always has been because it's a happy namby-pamby family like Helmet Head proclaims, then surely a video like the one I just played wouldn't have needed to exist. It should have gone without saying to these people. It should go without saying now. She would have needed to come out with some article and video alike, explaining things in a manner that's near enough akin to idiot form. However, they managed an independence referendum and making sure that we stay in Europe. They've conflated the two yet again. When these people voted the way that they did because they wanted independence at some point down the line, and it isn't part of it. It doesn't specify in the mandate that an independence referendum would be granted in the event of being taken out of Europe against our will, and as a result of the independence referendum being potentially won as a result of, it subsequently meant that we would hop straight back into Europe. No, this is a relatively recent revelation that the SNP have been, bit by bit, adding tidbits of information into the narrative, but this was never the clear-cut bullshit that the SNP so matter-of-factly tried to make it out to be. However, so we compare this article, which, as I said, just one final time, reminds us all that in the event of the UK leaving the European Union, Scotland has got their quote-unquote insurance policy. They've got an alternative. If the UK is determined to do that, we've got an insurance policy to have a referendum. And then we look at the other article. SNP wants 16 and 17 year olds to have vote in Christmas election. Scroll down a bit and it goes on to talk about how, on to say yada yada, that Mr Blackford was also confident about his party's prospects in Scotland and said they would improve their position. He added that the party is serious about another referendum on Scottish independence in 2020. He said, the fact is, we want a mandate for our referendum. We have a mandate for our referendum, which we won in 2016. We have a mandate for our referendum, do you? We want to make sure that that's reinforced in this general election. We were told in 2014 that if we stayed in the UK, our rights as EU citizens would be respected, and it was a partnership of equals. The position of the Parliament must be respected in all of this. Lie upon fucking lie at this point. I've come to expect nothing less than this fat little bastard and his fucking lies. So first of all, right at the bat, we've got this element here where he refers to the party being serious about another referendum in Scotland on Scottish independence by 2020. Why 2020? Because the year after that, then their mandate disappears anyway because of a upcoming general election. So it's got to be next year. But as previously stated in the other article, he quite clearly reiterates what I say quite frequently on this channel. I make reference to their mandate that they can coincidentally leave out whenever they refer to a mandate that they obtained. He states here that Scotland's got an alternative if the UK is determined to take us out of Europe. So if that doesn't occur, they don't have said alternative to act upon. They don't have their insurance policy. So explain to me how they can be serious about another referendum of Scottish independence. What, are you going to tell me that they're relying on Brexit occurring? They're just waiting, counting down the days until Brexit actually happens now? For them to then act upon their mandates that they claim they've got, even though the criteria has not been met? Well, if that was the case, why have they done nothing other than try to stop Brexit for 3 years? Why is this so fucking difficult for people to compute? It's unbelievable just how many people seem to be won over by these pathetic lying bastards who would not be in the positions in this country that they're in currently if it wasn't for the fucking lies. To the right to determine its own future. Scotland should have a right to determine its own future. Tropes that they throw about are paper thin at this point. You know, the claims have been cast aside and ignored, etc, etc. They died a long time ago. I mean, did their self-awareness die alongside their self-respect when they were pissing about with their never-ending amount of court cases? You know, they've had it all their own way for God knows how long. It then says that we were told in 2014 if we stayed in the UK, our rights as EU citizens would be respected, and you people said in 2014 that if we voted for independence, you intended to take us straight back into Europe with your white paper. So, on the one hand, we've got the UK stating the obvious, because it's an inevitability that if you'd voted to stay in the UK, you would have been part of the EU. You might as well have just said if you rejected independence, you'd stay part of the UK. It's a ridiculous claim, but this is what they do. The SNP cannot formulate a convincing argument to put to the public and the wider world in general. He wants to make sure that this is reinforced in the campaign this year, the campaign election. So what does that mean exactly? I'm sure time will tell. They want to reinforce a claim that they've got a mandate for a referendum that they won in 2016, although they have done nothing other than obstacles and barriers in the way of them being able to obtain said mandate requirements. The little things that they love to miss out because it kind of blows a little hole in their narrative. It's serious about another referendum on Scottish independence. The simple fact is we have a mandate for a referendum, a mandate that he quite clearly refers to in this little paragraph here as an alternative if the UK is determined to leave the EU.
On the question of mandates, I also want to be very clear, Chair, that when it comes to mandates in Scotland, we will be fighting this general election for three objectives. One will be to stop Brexit, not to rubber stamp it. Two will be to get rid of the most right-wing Tory government in my lifetime. And three will be to demand that people in Scotland have got the right to choose an alternative future, an alternative path of doing things, and should not be dragged along against their will.
And this is the mastermind scheme in all its glory that Big Bad Beta Blackford claims will win round voters in Scotland if they're not already convinced. And of course, it's no different to the garbage they were claiming when the EU elections were coming up. They incorporate claims of independence, or Scotland having a right to choose its own future, and of course that's based on the notion that there's a mandate out there somewhere, bearing in mind, of course, that the talk of independence originated from said mandate, but that's to pacify the voters that support them because they want independence. That's to pacify the voters that are starting to get a bit impatient. But not only that, they then talk up another reason that they wish people to vote for them in the upcoming election. A contradictory reason, of course, to stop Brexit. And in stopping Brexit, they no longer have a mandate at all. Therefore, there is no grounds for them to stand there and talk about Scotland having a right to determine its own future, because bearing in mind, this is all set on the back of a claim that we were supposed to be leaving the European Union, and theoretically that could have occurred a long time ago if Theresa May wasn't trying to shaft the country, and it could also have occurred at any point if Nicola Helmet Head Sturgeon and the Rainbow Unicorn delegates had just voted for her shit deal to begin with a long time ago. They could have been out holding their referendum and sailing off into the sunset like they claim. But yet they didn't do that. And their excuse is rather nonsensical. Because on the one hand they talk about trying to stop Brexit for the UK's interests because they don't want the UK to be damaged, while simultaneously claiming that they intend to have a referendum, even though that referendum can only be carried out legally unless they manage to obtain one by fleecing the system with their referendum bill. But for the sake of argument, let's talk about the mandate and the mandate only, because that is what they are referring to. The excuse that's touted every single time when it comes to why they're trying to stop Brexit but yet claim to want independence at the same time is that they're trying to look out for the UK's interests. But yet, If their story was to be believed, the UK's interest would be hindered anyway, because they claim that they want to break away from the Union and sail off into the sunset to join the EU federalist hellhole that they claim is a happy namby-pamby family. Bear in mind that the EU election, they told people to vote for them if they want to stop Brexit. They didn't, yet. And bearing in mind that their claims of giving the people a right to choose, all this hypothetical non-existent referendum that they intend to hold, that relies on permission. That relies on conjuring up a referendum bill and asking the Parliament of Westminster for permission for them to have a referendum for fuck all, with no criteria to be met, nothing. Sure, no. Mention the mandate, they mention the fact that in the event of Brexit occurring, they've got a referendum, the right to hold a referendum for independence to prevent us being dragged out of the European Union against their will when the circumstantial changes, etc., that would grant them the right to call upon a referendum. That then gets put into the airwaves, and over time they constantly refer to this giving the people of Scotland a right to choose rhetoric from time to time, and then as enough time passes by, they then start talking about a completely different referendum that requires permission all of a sudden, and they conflate the two and nobody calls them out and people buy into it. It's ridiculous. Independence is what they truly wanted. Explain why they're trying to fucking stop Brexit. But independence first and foremost, and that was their number one priority. Then the bullshit that they have been participating in, the bullshit that they are espousing in this video here, as well as every other day this week and this month and this whole year, everything they've done up until this point contradicts that claim.
Scotland, and if we win that mandate, and if we win that election, then I demand that other people in this chamber respect that decision.
And that's not how it works at all.
I campaigned for independence all of my life. If there was an easy or shortcut route, I would have taken it by now. But we have to.
You could have had a shortcut route, Helmet Head. It was called Theresa May's withdrawal agreement.
To demonstrate majority support for independence in a process that is legal and legitimate, and crucially, not just domestically in the UK, but internationally and in Europe in particular, will be accepted. And that's the right way to go. Now, a general election does give the SNP the opportunity to allow people to demonstrate their support for independence.
But you don't think it's sufficient?
To allow people to demonstrate their support for independence.
But you don't think it's sufficient in itself as a mandate for independence?
The SNP could and has won a majority of seats in a Westminster referendum on a minority of votes. Now, no matter if I wanted to try and argue that we should become independent on that basis, nobody in Europe would listen to me in terms of the legitimacy of that. So
that's right. Helmet Head dismissed claims the SNP winning a majority of seats in a general election would be enough for independence to be declared. Nor does it constitute some brand new, grand spanking referendum. But of course, this is Beta Blackford's, big bad Beta Blackford, taking the fight to the Brexiters in Scotland, living up to the responsibilities and the duties, doing his bit by winning round Scotland. Oh, fuck me, man. Peace.